Welcome everyone. This is Axum from Fire Emblem once again, and today we're going to be reviewing Genealogy of the Holy War. So for those of you that don't know, Genealogy of the Holy War, which is FE4, was released for the Super Nintendo. It's known to be a game that is loved by many but played by few. Almost like its cousin Thracia, but that's a video for another day. Genealogy is a game that I would say has almost a cult-like following, with people really praising its plot and its direction, but its gameplay is a little bit different from the other Fire Emblems. My review here today is to try to show my perspective as a veteran of the series of what I think about Genealogy of the Holy War and how I felt it holds up against other entries in the series. I want to start off with mechanics. Genealogy of the Holy War has some of the most interesting mechanics by far of the Fire Emblem series. It has a castle, which is basically like your hub base, in which you can access the armory, the arena, and also class promotions. Every single individual unit has their own pool of money, which some would argue is an interesting mechanic. There's no trading at all, and it's all a cumbersome system in which you have to pawn off to a guy and then rebuy it with money at a higher price, which means your resources have to be distributed in a weird way. It doesn't really make a lot of sense. You're also not really aware of when the resources drop or when they drop from. They could drop from an enemy, you can get them randomly at a village. So if you're just trying to reach a village really quick in order to get an item, but you go with somebody wrong, you're going to have an item stuck on a character that's not going to be able to use it at all. The mechanics in this game are just really strange, and they don't really hold up to the standard of the Fire Emblem games that we're used to with trading and equipping and so on and so forth. Some people really like it because it means the inventory management system is more complex and you have to think ahead. But if you're playing it for the first time, you're not going to know these things, which makes it super frustrating when you get it on the wrong character. Another thing that bothers me about the mechanics is that there is a love system in which characters can build up love points. You actually have children later on that affect their growth rates. It's really cool, the aspect of affecting your children later on with the growth rates and the pairings that you have and the skills you get to pass on. That part I think is fantastic. It's actually emulated in a lot of newer Fire Emblems like Awakening and Fates, and to some degree I really like that and I think it's really cool. The actual love system is pretty trash. There is no real way to know how many points you're gaining or who's building up support with who or how it even builds up. There's no indication of this in the game whatsoever, meaning that on a first playthrough, all of the pairings that you're going to have are pretty much going to be random or whoever is there. The last bit of the mechanics that I really do not like at all is the fact that there are random items scattered throughout the map in which if characters just stand on them, they'll get those items, or stat ups. There is nothing that tells you at all about where to pick up these items, and they are important and very strong items. We're talking about legendary weapons, we're talking about brave axes, weapons that are just really good and can alter the course of the game that you have no idea about whatsoever, and you can't even know where to stand or who to visit what castle with or who to talk to who to get which weapon. It's very convoluted, not indicated to the player at all. Frankly, I don't really understand how it gets so much praise about all these secret little events when they're actually pretty obnoxious to find out if you don't have a guide. Now let's move on to the aspect of map design. This is where I think Genealogy is at its worst. The maps are absolutely atrocious, and it has more to do with the character balance portion that we're going to get later on, but the maps are massive. They are so large. They are incredibly large. They have a ton of roads, and the road has an interesting mechanic in which like movement on it is penalized less, so you have basically 1 square of movement costs 0.7, so you can move a little bit further, which is super interesting, but you'll take a penalty to your avoid. But the maps are so large that they're not really designed for the majority of the units in the game. There's a reason why they call Genealogy of the Holy War the Horse Emblem, because horses and characters with high mobility are just leagues ahead of anything else in the game. As a matter of fact, the most efficient way to play this game is to put every single character that doesn't have a horse in the castle, never deploy them at all, barring like maybe Sed and Lewin, and just walk all the way to every single objective with your horses and dominate the entire game. This is not good map design. That's not even the worst part. There are multiple areas in the map in which there's just siege tome after siege tome after siege tome and ballista, in which the only way you can effectively enter those points is by using a unit with high movement, chip them, and then pull back out, or use someone to just avoid tank absolutely everything. There is no other feasible way in which you're going to haul your very weak infantry units all the way over there just so they can maybe dodge and then get completely obliterated in the process. The one aspect that I think is pretty cool about it though, the maps do represent the real world, and there are events that occur within the map itself, so every chapter, since it's so large, actually feels like there are multiple subparts to it. But if that's the case, just do subparts. I never understood the praise that this game has for holding a chapter for over 2 hours. That is not a good design. There are many ways that they could have put this, much like how they did Fire Emblem 1 and Fire Emblem 2 and Fire Emblem 3, in which you just had smaller maps, in which you completed that and moved on with the story. You could have done this by sectioning as well in Genealogy of the Holy War. But their overarching ambition of trying to create these massive maps actually invalidated half of the cast. Really is just you moving from point A to point B for over 20 turns. I'm not kidding. There was one time I made a wrong turn with Seliph thinking he needed to go somewhere else, and it took me 15 turns to get Seliph from one spot to another. We should segue on into character balance then. Like I said, there is absolutely no point in discussing character balance because the horses absolutely dominate everything. There is 1 or 2 units in the game that are not horses that are also incredibly powerful, and it's probably Set and Lewin, and that's because of the existence of Frassetti, which is a legendary weapon that you get later on in the game, which makes them super tanky and super strong. To that end, there are also the Swords Masters, Arya, Shannon, and Ulster, along with Larcey. Those guys are absolutely busted too. High avoid, strong legendary weapons, and to make things even better, one of the best strategies you can do is to actually give them a leg ring so they move like horses. So you basically just have horses all the time anyway. Many times I've been playing and my mages have all been just sat on the bench or too far away that they can't even participate in combat, and when they do, they're so under-leveled because they never saw combat at all that they can't do anything. They're just sitting there like cannon fodder, getting a chip damage here, a chip damage there. Your horses are going to do the majority of the damage, the majority of the combat, and to play the game efficiently and fast, you're going to want to do that. So character balance is out the window. If it doesn't have a horse, it either has to be super avoidy and tanky, or it has to have staves or magic or some sort of utility that can actually help. Also, if you have access to a legendary weapon, it puts you leagues ahead of any other unit in the game. And they're just so busted adding so many stats that it trivializes other units that don't have access to it. The animations though are pretty cool, and I'll give it some credit where it's due. And the special skills that come up and the vantage combinations and things that you can do are pretty cool and allow for a good type of unit building within the game. This game is also heavily invested into juggernauting, meaning that you're going to grab one unit, buff it up, give it all the experience, a lot of items and stuff, put it on a void tile, and just watch as the enemy phases basically everything that comes at it. And it also is weird because all of the generals on the map, which are usually the bosses, they have Pavais. And Pavais can just activate and nullify damage, which is okay because that's probably a system of balancing given that the generals are stationary, they don't really move. So I get it. But at the same time, if you want to play aggressively and move up really fast and try to take this castle or whatever, you always have to deal with the aspect of randomness because you could just randomly fail. And there's nothing you can do about that. And honestly, I don't like that in game design, but hey, to each their own. Now let's get to the nitty-gritty of this. The thing that Genealogy is praised the most for, the story. Now I gotta say, the world building in Genealogy of the Holy War is probably one of the best I've ever seen. It gives you a lot of world building in the backgrounds before the chapters begin. When the maps start, you get a little bit of conversation between the main characters, you get a little bit of background as to why they're doing this, but it doesn't really go that much deeper. You'll get some from the villains, which are okay too, but the characters themselves don't really get much development. I'll give you an example. Teochew with her father, and Teen with Bloom. There's a big abuse mechanic going on there between both of them in the relationship, But the reality is, you're only ever going to see that conversation if you deploy Teen to attack Bloom. That never quite happens, because Teochew or Teen are so underleveled that if you attack Bloom, they're going to explode and die a horrible death. So why would I waste my time doing that? Unless you're going to sit there and grind and grind and grind so you can finally see this boss conversation, then maybe you'll get to see all of these obscure, cool facts of characters that you're never ever going to observe in a first playthrough because you can't even utilize those units that are given to you with those relationships. It's a super weird and convoluted way to lock good storytelling behind character combat. It just doesn't make much sense to me. And while we're talking about the story, there are two generations in this, one with Sigurd and one with his son Seliph. Some good plot twists, some good storytelling, some good forwarding of the plot. However, there is a big question mark in the air about a love relationship that happens within the story. A lot of people praise this love relationship as one of the best in Fire Emblem ever. There is absolutely nothing that indicates that this is a love story besides the fact that I saw you and I fell in love. And now, maybe you're sitting there thinking like, oh, that's so romanticized, that's so cool. But in reality, it's not that cool. It's not that cool because you never really deep dive into it. You never really explore it. They never even talk about why it happens. You get at most a chapter of dialogue about this, and it's not even that much to justify the love relationship that basically threw the whole continent into turmoil. So, albeit the love story is pretty weak, the overall plot and the politics are pretty good. The final boss itself is pretty interesting, you know, classic like end of the world type of stuff, but it builds up to that. So, you know, you see through the manipulation of all the things that occur. Plot twists in this game are pretty good and probably one of the most unique in the entire series itself, setting up for the second generation, which is absolutely fantastic. So for that part, I will give praise where it's due. In conclusion, I really have one thing that I keep going back to every time I see Genealogy of the Holy War. It's too slow. I can't deal with all the turns of moving characters from one point to another to be rewarded by some 3 lines of dialogue so then I can move another 20 squares to another place so that I can get an underlevel character that is not going to participate in combat but that I still have to hit and turn on so that I can move to another place. That type of play style versus reward isn't really what I like in Fire Emblem games. When someone comes to me and tries to defend Genealogy of the Holy War, and they start by saying, well, if you just play really slow, or if you just understand that the game is not supposed to be played this way, or if you just alter the way you... I'm going to stop you right there. The reality is, if you have to start your sentence with, if you just do it exactly the same way I did, then it kind of proves the point that the game could be better for other players. In regards to the Fire Emblems that we know and like, because of the fact that it cannot develop at the same rate or at the same speed. But Genealogy of the Holy War for most of the time is just an absolute crawl. There were many times that I was playing that I almost decided to quit and be like, I don't think it's worth the experience. But I did get through it. I will tell you this, the unbalanced classes along with the long draining maps and the inventory management system really bogged down the experience for me in such a way that I didn't find it a very enjoyable one. I do commend people that like it, and I think it's worth a try out at least once, but it's not really a game for me, and I would probably rank it as one of my least favorite Fire Emblems. There is, however, a very good plot and some interesting characters behind this game, which means at least it's worth a playthrough. I want to thank you guys so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. I know I was a little brutal in this review, but don't let it deter you. You should still play it. It's an interesting Fire Emblem game. Please leave a like and subscribe and let me know what you think about Genealogy, and have a great day.